Can anybody tell me or share with us what you believe or who a steward is? Who is a steward?
I would say that a steward is a person who takes care of another man's property.
All right. So a steward is a person who takes care of another person's property. So we're going to see what a steward is and who are stewards. So does every one of us here have some kind of responsibility that we takes care of somebody else's property or something else that belongs to someone else? Each and every one of us. Therefore, we can conclude that all of us are stewards in some way. Right? All right, so we want to know God's idea of who a steward is and what is stewardship. And therefore, it's important that we are willing to listen to his counsel of how we can be a good and even a better steward, because they have bad stewards and they have good stewards. But it's important for us to understand that the counsel we receive must be from the Word of God. That must be our source. So turn to Psalm chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. And this has to do with counsel, receiving counsel.
Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish.
Amen. So we see that a person who, if we intend to be a good steward or to excel in our stewardship, then we must listen to the counsel that comes from God himself. And these 5 points, I noted these 5 points that was brought out in Psalm chapter 1, 1 to 6. It says, those who walk in God's counsel are blessed. It therefore means all of us here who walk in God's counsel are blessed. Can you agree with that? Yes. And you have to claim it. Those who walk in godly counsel are blessed. Our delight, or your delight and meditation, must be the Lord. It says in the law of the Lord. But the law is the same thing as the Lord. It is his law. This source, which is God's counsel, keeps you fruitful and prosperous. Didn't it say that you shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water? So it means that there is a constant flowing and outflowing. So there is fruitfulness and there is prosperity. And God's counsel preserves such an individual in the judgment. Because it says the ungodly will not pass the judgment. Which means the godly will do what? Will pass the judgment. That is the opposite of the ungodly not passing. They will pass the judgment. In other words, the judgment is for the godly. What does this have to do with stewardship? We will see. And his way of righteousness, that is God's way of righteousness, is yours and mine continually. He knows the way of the righteous. All right, I want to read it in this other version, the way it is put over. It says that, blessed is the one who does not walk in steps with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so with the wicked. They are like chaff. The wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. But we want to emphasize on these 5 points that brought out in Psalm 1 verse 1 to 6 with regards to the stewards of God. So we want to look at the definition of a steward. As Brother Victor mentioned, a person who is in charge of another person's property. And here, this is taken from the Noah Webster Dictionary. The definition of a steward: the steward was then originally a chamberlain or a butler, a man employed in great families to manage the domestic concerns, superintend the other servants, collect the rents or income, keep the accounts, etc. You know, when God came to Abraham and promised him a nation, what did Abraham say? Genesis 15:2. What did Abraham say to the Lord? What was his response to the Lord? What was Abraham's response to the Lord when he told him that his seed would be like the stars and he will have a nation? What did Abraham say to the Lord?
In my recollection, I think he said something about his steward Eliezer. Not having a son, but his steward Eliezer.
Right. Abraham said to the Lord, well, I have no seed. So the only person that I can think of that can inherit what I have is this steward. You hear what he said? Eliezer was his steward. Eliezer would have had to be of such a character that Abraham was willing to make him his heir. Imagine that? So this teaches us something. It also tells me something, that Eliezer had such a master that he was accounted worthy to be placed in such a position. Do we have such a master? And are we such stewards that the Lord will say, you are my heir? The Lord promised to make us that way. He promised, but it must be a willing submission. It must be a willing submission. And we must be looking. Eliezer was looking at who? Abraham. And saw the example that he set. So as stewards over other servants, we are also reminded that, like Abraham, we are to be faithful stewards. That we are placed in such a position that we can give a good account. We know that the one who is our master is the one who knows whether or the account that we give is one that is worthy of being placed as an heir. So what a character a steward must have. And we are to know who is our master. We are to focus on our master. Continuing the Noah Webster Dictionary, it says, this is the 5th point: in scripture and theology, a minister of Christ whose duty is to dispense the provisions of the gospel, to preach its doctrines, and administer its ordinances. This is the definition of a steward according to the Noah Webster Dictionary. An online dictionary says a person employed to look after the passengers on a ship, aircraft, or train. We know long ago they used to call those stewards. And in colleges, an officer who provides food for the students and superintends the concerns of the kitchen. Now I went to look at the meaning of the word steward from the Strong Concordance, and it says that manager of a household. Agreeing with everything that it said so far. The manager of a household, a manager, a steward, a guardian. Now the Apostle Paul spoke about stewardship or being a steward in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And I'm sure that these 1 Corinthians 4 would have been done here at Sabbath school. But as we go further, before we get into Paul, the question I want to ask is, what then is stewardship? And there's an image that I found on Google that I really spoke to what is being shared here this afternoon. It encapsulates the thought of what a steward should be like or is like. And I believe it's scriptural. I believe it is an inspiration from scripture itself. Okay, so So that would refer to a person then who like, okay, wives.
Like a housekeeper.
A housekeeper.
Yeah.
But
Someone who manages the household based on the laws of the household.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so this image I found to be really interesting. It involves everything with regards to the way a steward lives, or the way a steward is exemplified in their life. It says stewardship, the careful and responsible management, and we heard of the managing the household, of things entrusted to one's mind, body, time, money, environment, property, with proper regard to the rights of others. This encapsulates all that is possible for us to really and truly think of and recognize that in every aspect of life, this stewardship touches. It touches the way how we deal with each other and the way how we carry ourselves, the way how we are relating in everything. The mind, therefore, it affects the body, and time, money, environment, and property with proper regard to the rights of others. Even if you may not be, or one may not be, let's say, knowledgeable in any particular area, this here is saying that, listen, every area of our life, every area of whatever we have to do with, we can learn. You and I can learn. Okay? So if you don't know how to balance the books, you have somebody who can assist. If you don't know how to deal with property, you and I can learn. We have divine help that will enable us. So if, as we learn who a steward is, if a steward is who you are, a manager, one who takes care of, who protects and who serves, if a steward is who you are, can we agree then that your stewardship is what you do, that reflects who you are? That if as a steward is who we are, then we can agree that our stewardship is what we do that reflects who we are. All right? So we want to hear this from the Apostle Paul. Jesus said that out of the good treasure of your heart, you bring forth such things, and out of the evil treasure. So if as a steward, we are not being faithful to what we ought to be, then it will reflect who we are, whether a good steward or a bad steward. So Paul states it this way in 1 Corinthians 4:1 and 2. Yes. He says, so then, let us who minister be regarded as servants of Christ and stewards. This is in the Amplified Version. And look at what it says these stewards are. Trustees, administrators. And the word that we just look at, the Greek word, ikonomos, states a person who manages a householder. And only recently, we seek to better our mode of operation here, and we had trustees. So we see trustees, the stewards are trustees and administrators. But here Paul is saying, he's calling those who minister in the mystery of God as trustees, administrators. So I read it over again. It says, so then, let us who minister be regarded as servants of Christ and stewards, or trustees, administrators, of the mysteries of God that he chooses to reveal. In this case, moreover, it is required, or as essential and demanded of stewards, that one be faithful and trustworthy. So if a child ministers, whether they stand here and ministers before the congregation, is that child a steward? It says, so let us who minister. So ministering does not depend on if you have a title as an apostle or an elder or a pastor. So it says, so that let us who minister. But Paul was doing this for a specific reason as he was relating to the Corinthian church. The King James Version have it this way: let a man so account of us as ministers of Christ. But notice what it says here. In this case, it is required. So being a steward is not an option. Do we see that coming out here? When it says it is required and as essential and demanded of stewards that one be found faithful and trustworthy. It shows me that being a steward is not an option. And we will see why it's not an option. Because there's a word showing that every man, every human being who have been placed on this earth are stewards. And we're going to see why. Yes, Brother Leach?
Good afternoon to all. Yes. Now, two things you had mentioned that struck my mind. A trustee and a steward. Trustee being a steward. A steward is a person, as was said, who is entrusted with another person's goods. And to the extent that we recognize that we are entrusted with another person's goods, it is to that extent that we will be stewards. But we must first recognize that what we have is really another person's goods. It really belongs to another person. So the reason for my existence here right now, it is I have to be a steward of my existence because it belongs to another person. But you had mentioned trustees there. A trustee is a person that trust has been invested into.
Yeah.
So the trustees who are here are designated trustees on behalf of the government of Barbados. Yes? So the government trusts them to ensure that the organization run in accordance with the laws of Barbados. However, God's trustees are the elders. And God expects the elders as overseers to ensure that the organization here runs in accordance with the principles of heaven. So first, you have trustees who are accountable to God, and then you have trustees who are accountable to the government.
So let me ask a question. Those who are accountable to the government, is their accountability to the government, is there a separating line between their accountability to the government and the Lord?
Not really, because even as they are stewards, they're also accountable to God within their sphere. But if you are a trustee of the government is investing trust in you. And you have signed that you can be trusted to ensure that things go in accordance with the laws of the land. So the government is not going to come for me. Right? Now, as an overseer, the Lord is going to come, in the garden. Who sinned first? Eve. And then Adam followed. Who the Lord came and asked? He said, Eve, where are you? Did he say that? No, he says Adam. Because Adam was steward. He was the one accountable and trusted with the Lord, that even when things got messed up, the Lord shall come for him. So the elders of the church are the overseers,
right.
And the Lord expects for them to fulfill their trust in ensuring that there's a high level of doctrinal integrity and also structural integrity.
Okay. So we understand where you're going. To my mind, I'm still thinking too that even as being accountable, and I understand where you what you're referring to, but also I'm still thinking that being accountable to the government, also your conscience and your mind, because whatever you do, there must always be a clear conscience that even God approved of while you deal and liaise with the government. All right, so we're seeing that each of us are to be found faithful. So the Apostle Paul was dealing with this matter, and I want to highlight the 3 points that came out from these two scriptures. Servants of Christ are those who minister, and we know that this does not have an age attached to it. Servants of Christ are those who minister, while the Apostle Paul primarily was dealing with the apostles and with the church at Corinth and their attitude towards them. We also saw that they who are servants of Christ are stewards or trustees, administrators of the mysteries of God, and their stewardship it is not an option. Their stewardship must and is requiring faithfulness and trustworthiness. What I found in the case why Paul addressed the Corinthian church at that time with regards to these thoughts that he expressed, and to see what was Paul's emphasis. As servants and stewards, Paul said, let them consider us. And he asks that they are to regard them as the apostles as servants. The thing is that he had a problem with the Corinthians because there was a lack of respect for his apostolic authority. And with carefully chosen words, Paul showed how to have a proper regard. Now, the word that he used was, in using the word servant, he used the word which describes a subordinate servant functioning as a free man, hyperitas. So he was describing a servant that is functioning subordinate, yes, but as a free man. He did not use the more common word doulos, which means a common slave. He did not use that. But this word hyperitas literally means an under-rower, in the sense that someone is a rower on a big galley ship, a big ship. So though it is not the most lowly word for a servant, it is certainly not a prestigious position. Now, under-rowers serve Christ the master pilot, helping forward the ship of the church, as you mentioned, the overseer, toward the haven of heaven. And it is described by another person by the name of Morgan as one who acts under direction, asks no questions, one who does the thing he is appointed to do without hesitation. And I'm sure this was in the case of Eliezer. And one who reports only to the one who is over him. Remember when Eliezer was sent out to choose a wife for Isaac? When he went straight to where Abraham sends him, means he accepted that counsel from Abraham, and when he got there and it was time to go, there was the suggestion for him to delay, to wait a little, see if the young lady wants to wait a little. And what did he say? Don't hinder me. Don't hinder me. I have to be back. I went on my master's errand, and therefore I completed my errand. It's time to go. There was no hesitation. Right, so in addition now to a servant, Paul asks to be considered as a steward, one who was the manager of a household. In relation to the master of the house, the steward was a slave. But in relation to the other slaves, the steward was a master. So we see Abraham was a steward, but yet he was a master. You are stewards for parents. Parents are stewards, but yet they are masters of those who are in charge. They are in charge of.
You know what you're saying there? Within the context of Reformation, I find that we usually have a situation. You know, Paul says, and you mentioned that he defended his apostleship. He says, listen, I'm an apostle. Do you think that he could have come over as though he was like pushing himself in some way, or trying to lift himself up before the eyes of others? What was he really doing? Paul found himself in a situation where he says that he was an apostle, and therefore, like in 1 Corinthians 9, he has certain rights. Would we say that when a person is projecting their position and their authority, that it is really lifting themselves up? What was he really doing as a minister when speaking to the Corinthians?
Yeah, I would say rather than lifting himself up, he was elevating the office, or more precisely, the ministry, through which the gift of apostleship was being exercised. So it wasn't for his benefit personally, but it was for God's glory and for the benefit of other people who may be devalued or disrespected by others in exercising their gift.
Okay, remember when I began I began by showing that Paul, thank you, Dr. Greenwich, I began by showing that Paul had a real problem with the Corinthians. They were not respectful of the position of the apostles, their role. They were not respectful. They looked down on him and they looked down on them. So I would agree with what Dr. Greenwich just mentioned, because it was not, and I'm going to read something that he said, it was not simply about respect me. It was what I do, or who I stand for. Who am I representing? Who am I representing? Jesus, there was a point in time where Jesus did sound as though he represented himself, but it was not representing himself, but who he was, and therefore they took up stones to stone him. And stewards of the mysteries of God. What did Paul and the other apostles manage in the household of God? That's the question. So this is what he seek to bring to their minds. Among other things, they were stewards of the mystery of God. They managed in the sense of preserving and protecting. That was the purpose for which they were there for. And dispensed in the sense of distributing the truth of God. So if we do not appreciate who we have and the work that they do, then how would we receive the truth that is being given to us? You know, I think it's in Romans, in the book of Romans, the same Apostle Paul says that how can they hear if a preacher is not what? Sent. How can they hear if a preacher is not sent? If a preacher is not there, if there's not a living preacher to dispense the truth, how can they hear? Even though God can speak to us, there is a place for a living preacher.
Yes, and I think that you're perfectly correct in what you're saying. And, you know, ministers themselves run the risk of looking a particular way. That's why you ask the question. And we can find Elder Greenwich a very good theological reason why what he was doing was the correct thing to do. But then when we bring it down to the rubber hit the road in practical terms among a people, somehow that principle is not observed. Because if something is said, individuals would have this tendency of thinking, well, look, he looking out for himself. You understand what I'm saying? So we find it very hard to move away from, well, to combine the principle in the word with what is happening among us. Jesus made a statement. If my question is going to go off target, you can just bypass and move on. He says that a prophet is not without honor, but in his own country. How does that apply here?
I may be wrong. However, I'm thinking there's a saying that you don't recognize the value of something until it is gone. So I would think that if you have a resource that is common to you, like, for example, persons may fawn at the ocean here in Barbados, but then there's some of us that don't go to the beach, maybe only 3 times a year. And that's because we don't value or we don't understand the value of what we have. So if we apply that to the minister, then, or the apostle, he's there in that congregation as, well, he's commonplace, essentially. But when he goes somewhere else that they don't have what that congregation will have, then they observe the value and they give that value because they don't have it all the time. So where he is commonplace, he will not be appreciated as much as when he goes to another congregation.
Well, it is very much applicable because this is the very thing which Paul was defending, his stewardship and the value of it as a minister, as a steward. Because the question comes out did I not give you the truth? Is my life not worth, like for instance, you know, there's this saying that you never miss the water till the well run dry. So the water is there, the well is there, and it's pretty much have water every time. And you take for granted when you go at some point in time, you will get water. But then when the water run out, and you don't know because you're taking it for granted all the time. And that is why it's important that we appreciate each other. That's where we help each other in our stewardship. You see, I was asked to do something on stewardship, but my first initial idea was to get the book Counsel on Stewardship and just read off. And then I listened to Sunday's session, and I realized if we don't get our counsel from the Word of God and know where we are and how the Word is to be applicable in our personal experience, we will just be reading a lot of statements, and then it will just pass over our heads. Yes, please. You were going to say something?
Yeah, and you know, like you were saying about water, what came to my mind also, the children of Israel, when they were walking through the wilderness, came to a point where they had no water, and God told Moses to strike the rock. And when he struck the rock, water began to flow. And they drank. And you know, when they would first have seen water coming from a rock, it would have been, wow. I mean, something so mesmerizing. It would have been so absolutely awesome. And you're taking up, and every time you drink from this water, it seems as though you are drinking from something supernatural. But after a while, it becomes commonplace. You're going on and get some water from the rock, right? And therefore, you start to take for granted the water, because as it started, it continued. It was supernatural.
Right.
And it continued to be supernatural, but we take for granted the supernatural. And we have to come to a place where we don't take for granted the resources that are made available to us, as you were saying. We have to be proper stewards, whether in marriage. That is a very important place where we take each other for granted and not acknowledge the resource that is made available to us. When there are so many people that probably would be drinking from that fountain, and in taking it for granted, you would not experience the very same blessings and benefits.
Yes. One of the important things we are to realize that as stewards, we do not own the property. We are managers. Stewards are managers. It's just a reminder. And they, as stewards, had to be efficient managers of their master's resources. So a steward never owned the property he dealt with, but simply managed it. For his master, it must be managed faithfully. Therefore, we can gather from this that that stewardship is a way of life. It's a way of life. Dr. Grange have a point.
Yeah, when you underline that point about stewardship, in that what the steward manages is not his own, it brought home to me the thought that as a consequence of that, he does not own what he manages, then he must give an account to the one for whom he's acting as a steward. So accountability is very important in stewardship.
Very much so. Okay, so before we go into the next slide, let us stop.
Yeah.
It's going to come
But
back.
when you said practical, I was also thinking about something practical. Because it is interesting that we can sit here and hear the principle and don't apply it. For example, when we talk about stewardship, we are also thinking about our time. The use of our time, therefore, will demonstrate whether or not we are good stewards. Because we have to be stewards of time.
And I have that in here, but it will not be dealt with this evening.
Therefore, every
Go ahead.
time we are late, no, seriously,
Yeah.
if we walk through wherever we go and we are late, you remember the first thing that you said? That your stewardship is a revelation of who you are based upon how you deal with the goods that are available to you.
Yes.
And if at every event you are late, it's saying something about you.
Yeah.
You're not a good steward of your time, of the resource of time, which is one of the most valuable resources that have been given to man.
And I want to also add, Brother Victor mentioned something today, sadly, but that also how we treat the property that we are in. How we treat the property that we are in. This is a reflection of the way we treat our Father's business, our Father's property, wherever we are. Because wherever we are, if it's your own home, when you're coming to worship, to have family devotion, how are we treating the place that we gather? How are we treating the place? We are being practical now. How are we treating the place where we gather for worship? How are we coming? Do we see that worship at home is a little church? Is the church gathering there? Therefore, how are we treating it? That is one thing. The place where we gather. Time. We are to be managers of time. I usually say to myself, it seems as though as a people, we are not friends with time. That's why I say, we are not friends with time. Time seems to be like, like the last thing on our list. So to me, it's to be friends with time. As you are given an account as to how you see time then as a treasure, as a blessing. You know, the psalmist David says, teach me how to number my days. What was he referring to? What is David referring to when he said, teach me how to number my days? He's referring to how I use my time, how I spend my time, how I value the time that I have, that I'm existing here on earth. How am I using my time? Is it in wisdom, or is it, oh, I got this to do and I will just go and do it, and whatever time I finish, I finish. Do you know that there's something that keep coming to me, that, you know, like how we budget our finance? Do you know we can budget our time? We need to budget our time. Yes, under the Holy Spirit, the Lord will lead you. But if you deliberately says, listen, I want God to be the one that directs my time, and I put time for this and time for that, then there's nothing to be afraid that you will not get anything accomplished. Because now the Lord in his wisdom will direct you. So if you're wasting time in an area, the Spirit is there, because now you have prepared your mind, you have prepared your heart to let your time be directed outside of what you choose to do. So we want some practicality of our stewardship now.
You made a statement about time that triggered a thought in my head. Now, there is a saying by a man called Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says, dost thou love time? Dost thou love life? Then do not squander time, because it is the very stuff life is made of. And it is really challenging managing time, because your life is so interconnected with other people that impact on your management of time. Now, time stands alone as the talents, as among those talents God has given us, because when it comes to money, you can take money and put it aside. You can put it in the bank to gather interest.
Not
you can
time.
bury it in the backyard, and when you come back, bar nobody steal it, your money is still there.
Yeah.
You can't do that with time.
No.
Time, therefore, management of time therefore requires foresight. You cannot only manage it as you go or on the go, but you must exercise foresight and recognizing that, okay, this amount of time is lying ahead of me, and therefore I have to organize my affairs accordingly. And I think that's why God in his mercy has arranged time in such a way. You have days and nights and weeks. He's put a rhythm into life and into time that allows us to recover, think, and go again. So that at the end of every day we can look back and we can take inventory of how we've managed our time, and we can thank God for the victories that we've won, and then even the mistakes we can seek to correct them when the next day comes around or the next occasion comes around. Yeah.
Right. Even though we're not dealing with the time this evening, it's important for us to see that, as you said, Dr. Grange, time is intertwined in everything and in every aspect. It touches everything. Yes, please.
Yeah. I'm not talking because I'm some expert on the management of time. I am an offender as well. But I recognize that when you make an appointment with someone and you are, let's say, an hour late for that appointment, or even half an hour late, you have effectively stolen half an hour or an hour of that person's time, because your time is valuable. And that just underlines the importance of punctuality and so on, because you are stealing other people's time when you're impunctual or inattendant for a meeting or what have you.
Yes. That is critical. Very, very critical.
Jesus said he's about his Father's business. It gives me the impression that the most important thing for Jesus was his Father's business.
Yeah.
Now, if we, again, no. Is there, all right, what is the most important role as a Christian? What was the most urgent thing that a Christian has to be, a child has to do? What do you think it is? Okay. I believe that time is so important. That time should be used wisely so that you have time to pray, time to study, and time to witness. So if we are not using time properly, those things can slip away from us.
Definitely.
I really like what Elder Greenwich has said, because I was saying if you're stewards, we cannot afford to cause a person to squander their time by waiting on us. And there's some very rich people that if you make an appointment with them, you're 5 minutes late. When you turn up, you're not going to find them. You'd have missed that opportunity. And we have to come to respect and don't take people for granted. You make an arrangement to meet at a particular point of time, be there early, don't waste or squander or steal their time.
I just want to say something quickly. Stewardship also includes sharing the gospel. Like, we have to manage that in itself. And the young people are looking at the book of Acts. And we looked at chapter 5 today, and what was so mesmerizing was that even after Peter had been imprisoned, he would have come back out and did exactly that, continued to share the gospel. And so part of stewardship is not taking for granted the gospel and keeping it within the four walls, but spreading it as far as we can to the world.
Definitely.
Yes, sister, I think that we should get a tent and put it up out there and start a 6-week evangelistic crusade.
Are you on board?